Ladies and gentlemen, there comes a moment in your life when God stops whispering and starts confronting the very thing that has been silently stealing your strength, your purity, and your destiny. You feel it, even if no one else knows. You've been fighting a battle in private, while your purpose is screaming for freedom in public. But hear me today. The Holy Spirit is not exposing your struggle to shame you. He is inviting you into transformation. What you are about to hear will break cycles, restore clarity, and awaken a power inside you that your old habits never wanted you to discover. Stay right here, because your breakthrough begins now. When a person begins to understand that true surrender is not weakness, but the highest form of spiritual strength, something awakens deep inside the soul that has been asleep for years, waiting for permission to rise. It is the moment when you realize you are no longer willing to live in the exhausting cycle of fighting the same temptations, the same habits, the same internal conflicts that steal your peace and cloud your destiny. Every day you repeat the same struggle, you give a piece of your spiritual authority away, and surrender becomes the doorway back to reclaiming what was always yours. The Holy Spirit waits for that simple but powerful decision when you say, "I can't carry this on my own anymore, and I don't want to." In that moment, heaven meets your honesty with supernatural strength, because surrender is an invitation, not a defeat. You stop striving in your own power, and you begin aligning with a presence greater than anything that has ever controlled you. True surrender begins the very instant you stop running from the battle you were never meant to fight alone and start embracing the transformation waiting behind obedience. It begins when the weight of the old identity becomes too heavy to drag into the future you know God is calling you toward, even if you haven't yet seen the fullness of that future. Something shifts when the heart becomes tired of living below its divine potential and decides that enough truly is enough, not out of guilt, but out of awakening. And in that quiet but powerful realization, your entire spiritual direction begins to change, because surrender opens the doorway to a life you once believed was impossible. The daily battles that people hide, those internal routines, those private cycles of impulse, desire, and distraction, often feel impossible to escape because they become woven into the rhythm of mind, silently shaping reactions and thoughts without permission. You tell yourself you will stop, you will do better, you will gain control, but habits fed by secrecy grow strongest in darkness, and they keep a person trapped in a world of silent frustration. Surrender shines a light into those unseen places, not to expose you to shame, but to expose the limits you have unknowingly accepted. When you finally stop pretending you can manage everything alone, you begin accessing a strength that is not born from willpower, but from willingness to let the Holy Spirit step into the areas you've been trying to fix with human effort. And in that willingness, the chain begins to loosen, because the power maintaining the habit is no longer fed by the illusion of control. You realize the struggle was never about the habit itself. It was about the identity the habit kept you from becoming. Surrender breaks the agreement with that false identity and realigns your mind with a higher calling. It is in that shift that you discover the spiritual truth. The moment you stop fighting in your own strength is the moment you finally gain the strength to win the battle. That is where transformation begins, when you lay down the old weapon of self-reliance and pick up the authority that only the Holy Spirit can give. And in doing so, you reclaim the life you were always meant to walk in. When someone decides to stop battling the same destructive loop every morning and every night, the mind begins to open to a new path that was invisible before because bondage limits vision. You cannot see possibility when you are staring at the same failure, repeating itself through your days, keeping you locked in cycles of shame and the illusion that you are powerless to change. Surrender breaks that illusion because it shifts your focus from what you cannot seem to control to what the Holy Spirit can completely transform if you simply allow Him access. That shift ignites a new sense of spiritual momentum, a forward motion that lifts you out of discouragement and into purpose. You begin to sense that you are not your struggles, not your impulses, not your weakest moments, but someone capable of living from divine clarity and discipline. Surrender becomes the bridge between the identity you've accepted and the identity heaven already sees in you. As the old patterns start losing their grip, your confidence rises, not because you avoided the battle, but because you invited divine strength into it. You finally recognize that transformation was never meant to come from trying harder, but from yielding deeper. And when you allow that truth to sink in, your spirit begins to breathe again after years of suffocating under secret battles you were never designed to carry alone. In that breath, a new version of you begins to emerge, one rooted in purpose, purity, and spiritual authority. And once that version begins to awaken, returning to the old life becomes impossible. Surrender is the internal turning point where destiny begins to accelerate because the Holy Spirit cannot transform what you refuse to release. But the moment you hand it over, divine alignment begins. You start recognizing how much energy you were wasting trying to manage the same conflict over and over, and how freeing it is to let the presence of God step into places you once guarded in silence. You realize that surrender is not losing power but gaining it, not losing control but finally stepping into true control, the kind that comes from spiritual clarity instead of emotional reactions. You begin to feel a deep inner steadiness, a calmness that was impossible when your mind was divided between who you wanted to be and what controlled you in secret. With surrender comes an awakened awareness that your future is worth more than momentary escapes, and that your destiny has too much weight to be traded for temporary impulses. You start craving the higher life, the disciplined life, the purposeful life, because something in your spirit knows you are created for far more than cycles that make you feel small. The Holy Spirit empowers you to rise above what once held you down and walk with authority against patterns that used to dominate your thoughts. Each day of surrender becomes a step toward the transformed identity waiting on the other side of obedience, wrapped in clarity, purity, and inner strength. And as that transformation deepens, you begin living not from bondage but from breakthrough, not from struggle but from spiritual elevation. There comes a moment in every person's spiritual journey when the Holy Spirit begins to gently confront the hidden patterns that quietly drain strength, confidence, and clarity, even when the outside world sees only composure and success. These patterns often disguise themselves as small habits, innocent routines, or harmless escapes, but over time they grow into invisible chains that limit spiritual sensitivity and emotional stability. The Holy Spirit never exposes these patterns to shame a person. He reveals them because they are silently weakening the very foundation on which their calling is meant to stand. It is not the obvious battles that destroy spiritual power. It is the unnoticed ones, the ones practiced in silence, justified in secret, and repeated without awareness. When the Holy Spirit shines His light, it is always an invitation to freedom, never condemnation, because freedom begins with clarity. Most people do not realize how much inner peace and spiritual energy they are losing until the Spirit reveals the true cost of what they thought was insignificant. When He reveals with love, but also with precision, targeting the root instead of the symptoms. In that revelation, a person realizes that the struggle is not about the habit, but the hold that habit has on the identity they are becoming. And in that realization, transformation begins to unfold from the inside outward. The Holy Spirit speaks to the deepest layers of the human heart, the places we rarely allow others to see, because He understands that true change cannot happen at the surface level. People often try to modify their behavior while leaving the root untouched, and they wonder why the cycle returns with greater intensity each time. But the Spirit reveals the deeper truth behind the pattern, the emotional wounds feeding it, the lies empowering it, and the fears hiding underneath it. His revelation is never harsh. It is illuminating, like a warm light entering a dark room that has been cluttered for years. That light does not accuse. It clarifies, showing what has been stealing joy, fragmenting focus, and interrupting spiritual intimacy. And once a person sees clearly, the illusion of the habit's power begins to collapse, because darkness only thrives where there is no awareness. Awareness itself becomes a spiritual weapon, because what you can see, you can surrender, and what you surrender, the Holy Spirit can break. In that breaking, the mind begins to experience renewal, and the heart begins to breathe again without the weight of hidden bondage pressing against it. The Spirit's revelation becomes a doorway into healing, identity, and true spiritual strength. He also reveals the deeper impact of habits on a person's destiny, because what feels private and personal can actually shape the direction of one's entire life. A private habit can influence how you think, how you pray, how you perceive yourself, and how you walk in the world. It can distort confidence, amplify insecurity, weaken discipline, and reduce your sensitivity to the voice of God. The Holy Spirit reveals these effects not to frighten you, but to awaken you, to show you the spiritual laws that govern your growth. He pulls back the curtain so you can see how a single routine can slowly erode mental clarity or dull your emotional awareness. He shows how certain habits feed anxiety, feed shame, or feed double-mindedness, all while convincing you that they have no consequence. And when you finally see the truth, something powerful shifts within you, a recognition that your daily decisions hold far more spiritual weight than you realized. In that recognition, a new hunger for purity awakens, not out of guilt, but out of desire for alignment with the person you know you were created to be. The Spirit reveals to elevate you, not to break you, and that elevation begins the moment you choose truth over comfort. The most profound work of the Holy Spirit happens when you allow Him into the private chambers of your heart, the places where you've stored memories, habits, and feelings that shaped your internal world without your awareness. He moves gently, speaking with a voice that cannot be forced, rushed, or ignored, a voice that pierces through noise and touches the soul with quiet conviction. In those moments when He reveals, you begin to understand why certain battles have felt impossible to win, why certain temptations feel stronger than your will, and why you sometimes feel spiritually disconnected. He reveals the patterns that have been draining your emotional energy, stealing your motivation, and weakening your discipline. And in that revelation, you begin to recognize that you are not weak. You were simply fighting without understanding the deeper spiritual mechanics at work inside you. As clarity increases, confusion dissolves, and the excuses that once justified the habit no longer hold power. You start to see that the Holy Spirit is not pointing at the struggle, but pointing you toward freedom, gently urging you to release what you have been carrying for far too long. And with every layer he uncovers, your spirit becomes lighter, clearer, and more aligned with your divine purpose. That clarity transforms your inner world, preparing you for the life you are stepping into. As the Holy Spirit reveals what has been weakening your spiritual strength, he simultaneously awakens the power you did not realize you already possessed, a power buried beneath years of repetitive battles and silent discouragement. His revelation is never merely informational, it is transformational, shifting your mindset from victimhood to authority, from confusion to awareness, from struggle to strategy. You begin to see that the habits holding you down are not greater than the spirit living inside you, and this realization rewrites your internal narrative. The very areas where you once felt powerless become the places where you start experiencing victory, not because the struggle disappeared, but because you now understand the truth behind it. The Spirit reveals to empower you, to equip you with spiritual insight, so you no longer fight blindly, but with understanding. You begin to walk with a new confidence, a strengthened identity, and a deeper sense of self-control birthed from divine partnership rather than human effort. And in that journey of revelation, you discover that the Holy Spirit does not just point to what is weakening you. He rebuilds what was broken, restores what was lost, and strengthens what was weary, until you walk in clarity, purity, and spiritual authority. There comes a turning point in every person's life when they realize that temporary pleasure has been robbing them of long-term purpose, and in that moment, the heart begins to awaken to a deeper desire for meaning. You start to understand that every choice is a seed, every action is a direction, and every habit is shaping who you are becoming, whether you see it or not. The Holy Spirit begins to open your eyes to the truth that momentary escape cannot satisfy a soul created for destiny, and that real fulfillment comes from discipline, vision, and spiritual alignment. When you choose purpose over impulse, something powerful shifts inside you, because you are no longer living from the surface of your emotions. You are living from the depth of your calling. This inner shift strengthens your mind, sharpens your focus, and gives you the ability to resist what once controlled you with ease. You begin to recognize that every moment of obedience builds spiritual muscle, and every temptation resisted expands your capacity for greatness. You start valuing the person you are becoming more than the comfort of the moment, and that single shift changes the entire trajectory of your life. You feel your identity rising, your confidence returning, and your spirit gaining clarity that was once buried under impulsive routines. And in that rising, you begin to taste the life you were always meant to live, strong, intentional, and connected to a higher purpose. When you decide to replace temporary pleasure with lasting purpose, you begin to experience a level of self-respect that no momentary indulgence could ever give you, and that self-respect becomes the foundation of transformation. You start waking up with a sense of direction rather than regret, because purpose realigns your energy, your thinking, and your entire emotional rhythm. The Holy Spirit empowers you to see beyond the surface, to recognize the spiritual consequences of your choices, and to understand the value of living with intentionality. You begin to choose what strengthens you instead of what drains you, what builds you instead of what weakens you, and what aligns with your destiny instead of what distracts you. As this shift deepens, the pull of old habits begins to lose its power, because your hunger for growth becomes stronger than your desire for escape. You realize that every time you say no to a temporary comfort, you are actually saying yes to a future filled with clarity, confidence, and inner strength. And in that yes, your spirit begins to expand, your discipline increases, and the quality of your thoughts elevates to a higher realm. You start walking with a sense of worthiness, not because you achieved perfection, but because you finally honored the calling within you. With each step, you feel yourself rising above your former limitations, stepping into a version of yourself you always hoped existed, but never knew how to reach. And as you rise, the grip of the past begins to break. DOMINTATE, YOFS DILYPROTECTU from your own DECISIO nourished NS. Your mindset transforms from reactive to intentional, and this shift becomes the cornerstone of your new identity. You no longer live controlled by impulses that promise relief but deliver emptiness. Instead, you are guided by a vision that breathes life into your spirit. The Holy Spirit strengthens your ability to see the difference between what feels good now and what builds a powerful future, and this sight becomes a spiritual superpower. You start valuing discipline not as punishment but as freedom, because you realize that true freedom is the ability to choose what is good for you consistently. That mindset elevates your emotional resilience and gives you the ability to face challenges with clarity instead of collapse. You stop running from discomfort and begin embracing growth because you understand that discomfort is not your enemy, it is the birthplace of transformation. With each intentional choice you make, the old version of you becomes weaker, and the new version becomes stronger, more confident, more focused. You begin to walk with a steadiness that surprises even you, a steadiness born from alignment between your spirit and your decisions. And as this alignment grows, your life begins to produce fruit. Mental clarity, emotional strength, spiritual insight, and the peace that comes from living with purpose. And this fruit becomes the proof that transformation is happening inside you. Purpose becomes the anchor that holds you steady as the Holy Spirit renews your mind, because when purpose fills your heart, the space once occupied by destructive habits begins to dissolve. You start living from intention rather than impulse, from identity rather than emotion, and from clarity rather than confusion. Your decisions stop being reactions to feelings and become expressions of who you are becoming through spiritual alignment. This shift rewires your thinking, strengthens your self-control, and deepens your connection to God's presence, because purpose and purity always walk hand in hand. As you continue choosing purpose, your spirit becomes more sensitive, your focus becomes sharper, and your old habits lose their emotional appeal. You begin to see that every moment of temptation is actually an opportunity to reaffirm your identity, because identity determines behavior, not the other way around. And as that identity becomes rooted in God's purpose, you no longer feel pulled by the same desires that once dominated your nights, your thoughts, and your emotions. Instead, you walk with a calm authority, a quiet strength, and a deep inner certainty that your life is aligned with the Holy Spirit's direction. Your spirit becomes stronger than your urges, your purpose becomes louder than your cravings, and your destiny becomes clearer than your distractions. And in that clarity, you step into a life guided by intention, built by discipline, and sustained by the presence of the Holy Spirit. When the Holy Spirit begins to fill the places where old habits once lived, something profound awakens within you, something stronger than willpower and deeper than emotion. You start to experience a peace that does not come from avoiding temptation, but from rising above it with a new spiritual identity. This peace settles your mind and strengthens your heart, giving you the clarity to walk away from impulses that once felt impossible to resist. The shame that used to follow your old patterns begins to dissolve because the presence of the Holy Spirit does not coexist with condemnation. It replaces it with healing. You feel your confidence returning, not the kind built on performance, but a confidence grounded in the realization that you are no longer a prisoner to your past. The heavy weight of regret that once lingered over your decisions slowly lifts as God's presence takes its place. You begin to see yourself differently, not through the lens of failure, but through the lens of transformation and potential. That inner change creates a strength that no secret battle could ever destroy, because it is born from divine power, not human effort. And as you step into this strength, your relationship with yourself begins to heal in ways you never imagined possible. The presence of the Holy Spirit does not simply remove unhealthy habits. It rebuilds the broken places that made those habits appealing in the first place. He goes deeper than behavior and touches the emotional wounds, insecurities, and fears that shaped the choices you once made in silence. You feel a cleansing happening, layer by layer, as he gently replaces anxiety with peace, confusion with clarity, and impulse with intention. This rebuilding process restores your sense of worth, reminding you that you are not defined by what you struggled with, but by who you are becoming through his guidance. As your worth is restored, your decisions begin to shift naturally, because people who value themselves do not sabotage themselves. The Holy Spirit teaches you to honor your mind, your body, and your destiny, and this honor becomes the foundation of your new life. You begin to walk with a dignity that interrupts old patterns before they even form, because you now understand the value of protecting your spirit. And in this protection, purity is restored not just in action, but in the way you think, feel, and carry yourself. This inner purity strengthens your identity and gives you the courage to live boldly, free from the shadows of your past. And as these changes deepen, your inner world becomes a sanctuary where God's presence can dwell without interference. As the Holy Spirit continues to work within you, the old cravings and impulses that once controlled your nights and clouded your days begin to lose their authority. You start noticing a shift in your desires, where the thought of returning to former habits no longer feels enticing but empty and disconnected from your new identity. This shift is not forced. It is the natural result of being filled with something greater than the temporary pleasures that once distracted you. The Holy Spirit fills the space with purpose, conviction, and a deep sense of spiritual satisfaction that no impulse could ever imitate. Your thoughts begin to realign with truth instead of temptation, and your emotions are guided by peace instead of chaos. You find yourself wanting to grow, wanting to honor your calling, wanting to protect your progress not because someone told you to, but because your spirit has awakened. This awakening gives you the power to recognize what strengthens you versus what drains you, and that awareness becomes a shield against your former patterns. The Holy Spirit gives you a kind of resilience that allows you to pause, breathe, and choose wisely even in moments of pressure. With every wise choice, you reinforce your new identity until the old one loses every remaining hold over your life. And in that freedom, you begin to walk with a strength that cannot be shaken. The more you surrender to the presence of the Holy Spirit, the more your inner world transforms into a place of stability, clarity, and power. You begin to carry yourself differently because the weight of old patterns no longer bends your posture or dims your expression. Your mind becomes sharper, your emotions become steady, and your spirit becomes more sensitive to God's voice, allowing you to navigate life with a calm authority. You begin to feel what it means to walk in spiritual confidence, not born from ego, but from alignment with divine truth. This confidence becomes your new foundation, empowering you to face challenges without collapsing into old routines. The presence of the Holy Spirit becomes your anchor, your guide, your strength, and your shield, transforming every part of your life from the inside out. You notice that your days feel lighter, your thoughts feel cleaner, and your choices reflect the person you are becoming rather than the person you once were. This transformation touches every relationship, every decision, every environment you enter, because a purified spirit cannot help but radiate clarity. You realize that the life you are stepping into is not built on willpower, but on partnership with the Holy Spirit. And that partnership shapes you into someone capable of honoring purpose above impulse, and with every step forward, you embrace a life defined not by the struggles of yesterday, but by the spiritual strength rising within you today.